Assalamualaikum and a very good day everyone. Today our group will be presenting the Marxism theory on international relations. Before we begin, allow me to introduce our team members. First of all, SHAHMIN NAJWA, myself, ROWENA AYNNA, BATRISYIA and ZAIREEN. In today's presentation, I'll be covering the introduction, including what Marxism is all about, its definition and its origin, which goes back to the idea of Karl Marx. After that, we'll move on to the main points of the theory, where they'll touch on key concepts like how communism is seen as the end goal, the idea that economic power shapes global politics, the class struggle between the rich and the poor, imperialism and dependency where wealthy nations exploit weaker one, and why Marxism argues that capitalism is inherently unfair and exploitative, all leading to the goal of achieving a classless, equal society. Next, we'll go on to the analysis section, where we'll be discussing about the strength of Marxism, the weaknesses of Marxism, followed by the opportunities and with the threats. Then we'll move on to the impact of Marxism in international relations, broken down into economic impacts, political impacts, and social impacts. And finally, we will wrap everything up with a summary and conclusion, highlighting how Marxism offers a critical lens linking politics with economy and how it reveals the inequality shaped by capitalism. And with that, so first and foremost, what exactly is Marxism in international relations? So Marxism is a critical theory that basically challenges the way mainstream international relations like realism and liberalism explains global politics. So realism focuses on states fighting for power, meanwhile liberalism talks about cooperation and institution. But Marxism says, hold on, the real driver of international politics is the global capitalist system. So according to Marxism, the international system is inherently exploitative. It's built around an unequal relationship between two major classes, the global bourgeois, the capital-owning class, and the global proletariat, the working class. So in other words, the world is structured so that the rich continue to dominate and the poor continue to struggle. Or as people like to say, the rich stay rich and the poor gets poorer. So you can see this dynamic within our country. T20 represents the bourgeois, those who control capital, resources, and big businesses. B40 often reflect the proletariat, relying on wages, vulnerable to inflation, and affected most by... Alright, now let's move on to Now I will pass my next presentation to my teammates, Irene, for the main points. Thank you.
Now, let's move to the next part. Marxism did not emerge by chance. It arose as a response to the political, economic, and social problems of the 19th century. Workers faced exploitation, communities were disrupted, and existing ideas failed to protect the lower classes. In this section, we will explore the main causes of Marxism's rise. The first one is ideological factors. The rise of Marxism was driven strongly by ideological dissatisfactions with existing political ideas during the 19th century. At that time, most European societies were dominated by liberalism and monarchy, which promised freedom but often only benefited the wealthy elites. More workers and peasants felt excluded from political power and lacked a voice in decision-making. Marxism emerged as an ideology that challenged this unfair system by arguing the equality, class consciousness, and the idea that ordinary people should control the means of production. It focused on justice, anti-exploitation, and collective ownership become attractive to those who felt oppressed. For example, workers in industrial cities like Manchester and Berlin supported Marxist ideas because they offered a political alternative that represented their struggles and demanded real social change. Next is economic system factors. Economically, Marxism rose a response to the harsh realities of early industrial capitalism. During the Industrial Revolution, factories expanded rapidly, but working conditions were extremely poor, such as long hours, low wages, child labor, unsafe environments, and no job security. The capitalist system created a huge gap between the owners and the workers, leading to widespread poverty despite economic growth. Marxism gained popularity because it analyzed these economic inequalities and argued that capitalism was built on exploitation. People began to see that while factory owners became richer, workers remained trapped in poverty. For example, in Britain and Germany, factory workers supported Marxist movement because Marx offered an explanation for their suffering and a vision of their fairer economic system where wealth would be shared rather than concentrated in the hands of a few. Now, let's move to the next part. Marxism did not emerge by chance. It arose as a response to the political, economic, and social problems of the 19th century. Workers faced exploitation, communities were disrupted, and existing ideas failed to protect the lower classes. In this section, we will explore the main causes of Marxism's rise. The first one is ideological factors. The rise of Marxism was driven strongly by ideological dissatisfactions with existing political ideas during the 19th.
The first cause of rise is imperialism and dependencies, where the problem was visible. The main problem is that the rich nation exploit the poor nations to creating a global inequalities and dependencies. Why this caused Marxism to rise in international relations? Due to historical exploitation patterns. During the 19th centuries, powerful Western nations like Britain and also France colonized and exploit the weaker nations for their natural resources and also cheap labor, also known as imperialisms. This creates a dependency systems where the poor countries rely on the rich ones for the trades and survival. Colonial power extract resources, unsafe labor, and also destroy a local economics. Marxism saw this as a global exploitation similar to how factory owners exploit their workers. A concrete example is British India from 1757 to 1947, where the Britain extract approximately more than 45 trillion worth of wealth from India, forced India to grow cash crops from the cotton, indigo instead of foods. At the same time, British destroy India's textile industry to start British goods. The fifth cause of rise is capitalism. Capitalism became a dominant after industrial revolutions, but it caused a serious inequality. This system was unfair because the rich got richer and the poor stayed poor. Why did this happen? Due to the failure of capitalist promises. During the 1950s to 70s, development programs failed to lift poor nations. Gap between the rich and poor nation widened, and also trickle-down economic did not work globally. Also, visible injustice. During the Industrial Revolution in Europe, 18th to 19th centuries made capitalism the dominant system. Factory demand cheap labor, worker including women and also children work long hours with low wages while owner gains a massive profits. This inequality and worker suffering made people question the fairness of the capitalisms. Marxists rose as a response to the injustice, arguing that the workers were being exploited by those who controlled the means.
As the saying goes, every cloud has a silver lining. And that's exactly how we look at Marxism in international relations. Yes, it's often labeled as radical or too focused on class and economics, but behind all of that, there was a powerful silver lining. Marxism gave us a deeper, structural way to understand the world, something mainstream theories often miss. And this brings us to the analysis of theory, strength of the theory. So, one of the biggest strengths of Marxist and new Marxist approaches is how they explain global inequality with such clarity. So while other theories focuses on states or institutions, Marxism goes straight to the root, the unequal economic structures that shape the global system. So this helps us to understand why core countries like the US, Russia, Japan, the West and Europe continues to dominate, while many developing countries or states in the periphery struggle to catch up. And we can clearly see this dynamic reflected within our country itself, Malaysia, just like the global core periphery model. Malaysia has its own internal class stratification. Okay, we'll start off with T20, the national core. Control most wealth, capital, listener ownership, and investment power. And 40, the semi-periphery, stable but still vulnerable to economic shift. And then we have B40, the national periphery, most exposed to the cost of living crisis, wage stagnation, and limited upward mobility. So this mirrors Marxist analysis perfectly. Wealth and power concentrated at the top, while those at the bottom face structural limitations. The next major strength is the critique of global capitalism. So Marxism highlights how multinational corporations, MNCs, and global institutions like the IMF or World Bank keep unequal system in place. So Malaysia has seen this too, from foreign investors dominating key sectors to labor exploitation in manufacturing and plantation industry, where workers, mostly from the B40, produce massive profits that they barely benefit from. So in other words, Marxism doesn't sugarcoat anything. It openly criticizes how the world economy is structured to maintain domination. So it highlights how multinational corporations, MNCs, World Bank and IMF impose policies that benefit the poor, benefit the rich, while trapping the poor in debt and independency. So for example, in Malaysia, when Malaysia was faced financial pressure during the 1997 Asian financial crisis, the IMF proposed austerity measures that would have hurt local industries and increased unemployment, similar to what happened in Indonesia. So Malaysia actually rejected this, which shows how global financial institutions often push policies that prioritize foreign investors over local welfare. Another example, Remember when palm oil prices dropped because of the EU regulations? Who's the one actually suffering? Not European companies, but Malaysian smallholders, especially in rural B40 communities. So this actually reflects how global capitalism protects the rich but harms countries in the state, in the periphery or semi-periphery like Malaysia. And then lastly, Marxism's strength lies in its focus on material conditions. So instead of just looking at political speeches or treaties, it actually tells us to follow the money, the production chain, and the economic interest behind decision. So this explains real issues Malaysia faces, such as wage stagnation despite rising profits, dependence on cheap labor for global supply chains, urban-rural development gaps, cost of living crisis that hit B40 the hardest, and even the economic vulnerability that we've seen during the COVID-19 pandemic. So this example that I've given aren't random problems. They are actually tied to Malaysia's role in global economy. Export heavy, dependent on foreign investors, and vulnerable to current shifts. So Marxism helps us to see how material conditions shape political decisions. For instance, when prices increases, the B40 suffers the most. Meanwhile, the T20 remains largely protected. And that's class struggle. So in short, Marxism's silver lining is its ability to expose the real structures, economic, class-based, and exploitative, that shape not only global politics, but also the Malaysian socio-economic landscape. And that is all from me. I will pass on to the next presenters for the analysis of theory weakness. Thank you.
Next, we'll move on to the weaknesses of Marxism theory. Despite being the basis for many famous ideologies, including the communism and socialist theories, this theory is still lacking in many factors, including weak support from proletariat groups, its nature that pursue economic determinism, and an unclear system which showed the gap when it was applied in real life. Next, we'll move on to the weaknesses of Marxism theory. Despite being the basis for the first weakness, lack of revolution from the proletariat or the workers' group. As mentioned earlier, the idea of Marxism is to criticize the capitalist system where the workers' group are generating high profit for the bourgeois group, who are the bosses, but are not getting well-deserved compensation for their contribution. Supposedly, they should be getting support from the workers' group, right? Because the theory fight for equal economic gain, which is fairer and preserving the collective right of the workers. But in this case, the ideology received low revolutionary spirits from these groups themselves. Why? Because during that time, there is an embedded mindset among the people that the issue of poverty and inequalities are individuals' failure, not because of the system practiced during that time, which is capitalist system. So the workers' group did not see themselves as oppressed, or they do not see their contribution as exploited, because they believe that everyone has to work hard to be rich and successful. The first weakness, lack of revolution from the proletariat or the workers' group. As mentioned earlier, the idea of Marxism is to criticize the capitalist. Secondly, the weakness of Marxism is that the idea pursued by Karl Marx was too rigid and hugely bound the people to the economy, to the point that it implied that every other aspect of life like family, education, law, and even the state is only influenced by their economic status. So this application was not considering the fact that us human beings have free will and the ability to decide for ourselves, instead of just following the system. To prove the existence of workers' unions all across the world, especially in the capitalist system, to seek for higher wages, safer working conditions, and shorter working hours, as well as collective bargaining rights, showed that the working class were not just following the system blindly, but they had fought for their rights to stop any oppressions at workplaces. So not only that, the theory also believes that the changes in the society in terms of its social and politics are also caused by the economic values only. But the truth is, there are many other contributing factors to the changes. For example, you can see the movement rising all across the globe where people demonstrated their support to the Palestinians who are facing genocide by the illegal state. And these people are not influenced by any economic factors, but because of our own morality and sense of humanity. Hence, it is right to say that this rigidity made the idea closed, since it portrayed that the people are only a machine in the economic sector, without the desire or feelings. Secondly, the weakness of Marxism is that the idea pursued by Karl Marx was too rigid and hugely bound the people to the economy, to the point that it implied that every other aspect of life like family, education. Last but not least, Marxism theory only criticizes the capitalist system, but to replace it, Karl Marx and his partner did not come up with any resolute or detailed system. As a result, we can see that there are a few countries in the world that try to govern using the Marxism theory and to develop their own ideologies based on the idea, but unfortunately, the result came out differently. Some stood strong for a few years, while some failed to do so. Marx has strong belief that the capitalist system will collapse eventually, and it will be replaced with the socialism system, where the world will be divided into two huge groups, which are the proletariat, the workers' group, and the bourgeois, the bosses. Countries like China, Russia, and Cuba, they changed their governance according to this assumption of Marx, and they practice socialism and communism. However, many critics said Marx's belief is only based on mere faith. One of them, Karl Popper, he said that the socialism to change into capitalism was a statement that cannot be proven right or wrong scientifically. So we can see that socialist countries like the Soviet Union, which was developing drastically at first, but because of the weak base of the ideology itself and the lacks here and there, the nation fell into stagnation, and a few years later they collapsed. Last but not least, Marxism theory only criticizes the capitalist system, but to replace it, Karl Marx and his partner did not come up with any resolute or detailed system. As a result,
Next, let's see the opportunities of Marxism. The first one is critical perspective on global capitalism and inequality. Marxist theory in international relations offer a powerful lens for understanding how global capitalism shapes patterns of wealth and inequality between states. Instead of viewing international politics as driven mainly by military power or diplomacy, Marxism highlights how economic structures and class relations determine how benefits and how it exploited. It shows that wealthy core countries often rely on cheap labor and raw materials from poorer peripheral countries, creating a global system where profit flows upward while poverty remains concentrated in developing regions. For example, multinational corporations based in the countries like the United States, Japan, or even in the UK outsource production to lower income states such as Bangladesh, Vietnam, and Indonesia. Workers in these countries produce goods with extremely low wages, while most of the profits returns to corporations in rich states. This unequal exchange is a key insight Marxism contributes to international relations. The second is understanding the historical and structural roots of the state system. Marxist IR theory also reveals that the modern international system is not natural nor neutral. It is the product of capitalism, colonialism, and the search for economic dominance. Through historical materialism, Marxism shows how early capitalist states expanded outward, colonized territories, and reorganized global trade to suit their economic interests. These processes create a political boundary, trade network, and institutions that still shape global relations today. For instance, during the European colonial rule in Africa and Asia, colonial powers extracted resources, introduced plantation economies, and even built infrastructure mainly for exporting goods to the Europe. Even after independence, many former colonies remained dependent on exporting raw materials and importing manufactured products, showing how historical economic structures continues to influence modern IR. Marxism helps expose this long-standing economic foundation beneath today's political interactions. The last opportunity is linking domestic international dynamics. Another major opportunity offered by Marxism is its ability to connect what happens inside a country with events in their international system. Marxist theory argues that domestic economic structures, such as class relations, labor conditions, and modes of production, shape how states behave globally, while global capitalism also shapes domestic policy choices. This perspective shows that states are not completely independent actors. They are influenced by pressures from global markets, foreign investors, and international capitalist competitions. For example, developing countries often lower minimum wages, provide tax incentive, or weaken environmental laws to attract multinational corporations seeking cheap production costs. This results in domestic policies being driven not only by local needs, but by external capitalist demands. Marxism helps IR scholars understand these deep connections between the national and the global, revealing how international capitalism directly shapes domestic lives.
Now, we will discuss the major traits and challenges to the Marxism as the theory in international relations and global politics. There are three key areas where Marxism faces a significant challenge. The first one is the decline of the communist states. The second one is the rise of globalization and interdependence. And the third one is the failure of Marxism's predictions. First major threats to the Marxists is the decline of the communist states, particularly the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. This is the largest practical experiment with Marxism in the world, and its failure had significant consequences. It shows that the socialist economic system could not compete with the capitalism's economically and also socially. And this discredits Marxism predictions about the inevitable collapse of the capitalisms. For the example, after more than 70 years, the Soviet economy collapsed. Citizens experienced shortage, poverty, and also inefficiencies, and the former Soviet states quickly moved to adopt capitalist systems. This event highlights that Marxist theory faced practical limitations when implementing on a national scale and raised questions about its viability in the modern world. The second major threat to Marxism is the failure of its core predictions. So, Marx predicts that capitalism will eventually collapse due to its internal contradictions. The working class became increasingly exploited. However, over 150 years later, capitalism remains strong and the worker in many capitalist countries are better off than ever. For the example, during Marx times in 1850s, workers lived in slums, work more than 14 hours per day, and the children labor in the factory. Today, in a developed capitalist country, workers enjoy 8 hours workday, weekend, healthcare, retirement, and also home ownerships. Average life expectancies has rise from 40 to 80 years. Real wages have increased more than 20 times since Marx era. So why does they threaten Marxism? Capitalists adapted through a reform, such as a labor union, welfare program, and also regulations. Workers gain rights without a revolution contradict with the Marx predictions. Additionally, Marx assumes that people will work primarily for the common good, but in reality, people are motivated due to a personal reward systems, treating to the success for the Marxist system. The third trait to the Marxists is globalization and interdependence. Today, global trade and investment shows mutual benefits, not just exploitations. Poor countries often choose to join the global economy and foreign investment that can help them grow. Modern capitalism is flexible and strong. Many countries encourage entrepreneurship and also private wealth, which goes against Marxist ideas. Socialist or communist systems struggle without trade and investment without capitalist countries. For the example, Vietnam. After the Vietnam War, the socialist economy caused poverty. In 1986, the Doi Moi reform opened Vietnam to foreign investment. Their GDP grew 6 to 7% per year. Poverty dropped from 70% to 5%, and it became a major exporter.
Next, we'll share with you the impact of Marxism theory in international relations in terms of economy, politics, and social aspects. Next, I will start this part of the presentation with the global economic impact. First, Marxism is known as the theory that criticizes the system of capitalism, so we can tell that it focuses and contributes hugely on the economic aspect as its main doctrine. Economically, this theory has huge global impact since there are many communist and socialist nations like those in Eastern Europe and Asia continent. These nations that adopted the ideologies that were based from Marxism, they opposed privatization since they believed that this mode of capitalism would not cater to the government priorities such as building schools, hospitals, and public transport. This is because these facilities will not give those private institutions huge profit. Therefore, the socialist government began to practice centralized planned economies. So, planned economies is a system where the government leads the economic investment to reach social goals instead of earning profit from it. So, the state is also responsible for manufacturing and distributing as well as employing people in the economic sectors. They believe that this method is much more productive than to let private institutions to get involved. As a result, these nations turned all private ownership into state-owned enterprises for the government to direct economic activities. So there is no such thing as privatization. So when the government of socialites handle the economy themselves, they also controlled where the investment were made, which certainly they would only invest in other socialist states because they don't want to have any connection with the capitalist system or capitalist nations. I will start this part of the presentation with the global economic impact. First, Marxism is known as the theory that criticizes the system of capitalism, so we can tell that it focuses and contributes hugely on the economic aspect. So, the effect from the central planned economies that were practiced and the close collaboration involving those states of socialites and communists, it has led to the existence of the Eastern Economic Bloc. This bloc competed with the Western bloc, which is led by the United States and many other democratic countries. The Western bloc adopted a capitalist system where the nations were involved in the free market, meaning that they are more open to trade relationship with other countries in the world, so no border. The competition between the two blocs is said to have started as early as the Second World War ended, when the Soviet Union began to develop alliances with the countries in Eastern Europe like Albania, Bulgaria, East Germany, Hungary, Poland, Romania and Yugoslavia, initially to protect their military bases there. So while they provide support to these countries to rebuild after the World War II destruction, the Soviet Union established trade relationship with its nations, and at the same time, they spread the communist ideology to strengthen their position in the world. The quick expansion of the ideology and the little reliance of the socialist country to the Western bloc, as well as the growing trade competition, concerned the US, hence the Cold War. So, the effect from the central planned economies that were practiced and the close collaboration involving those states of socialites and communists, it has led to the existence of the Eastern...
Welcome back, and now we're going to talk about the impacts to international relations in global politics. So, when we look at politics through a Marxist lens, everything becomes a lot more clearer and honestly, a lot more realistic. So instead of seeing states as this independence heroes in international system, Marxism actually reminds us that, hey, the real game isn't about the flags. It's not about who has the most people. It's about class, it's about capital, and it's about who controls what. And politics, in the eye of a Marxist, isn't just politics. It's capital in disguise. So the first impact is state as a tool of capital. So Marxism tells us that the state doesn't fully control its own decision. Instead, it often acts in the interest of a capitalist class. So politically, this means that the direction of national policies is shaped by capital, not just public welfare. For example, in Malaysia, when Malaysia gives tax incentive to big companies like Intel, Samsung, Tesla, or keep regulations investor-friendly, it actually affected the country's political priorities. For example, policies begin to favor businesses over workers. Labor laws will stay weak to maintain foreign investment, and migrant labor dependence becomes politically normalized because it benefits the capital. So, a Marxist reading would say Malaysia's political choices are shaped to keep capital happy, not necessarily to protect workers or reduce inequality. For example, also in ASEAN countries like Vietnam and Thailand, they always keep wages low and labor high, and labor rights limited to attract MNCs. And politically, this means worker unions would remain weak and restricted, governments prioritize economic growth indicators over social welfare, and political decisions reinforce capitalist structures rather than challenging them. So, and also, do you guys remember the US-China rivalry in the region? So it actually pressures ASEAN government to pick sides based on economic interests and not just political ideology. The second impact is conflict and cooperation driven by capitalist interests. So Marxism actually argues that both conflict and cooperation happen because states are securing capitalist interests. This reshapes a country's political behavior on the world stage. For example, the US-China in ASEAN. So when China promotes Belt and Road, or the US, whenever they talk about freedom of navigation, it actually influences the national policies by pushing the countries to redesign foreign policies around economic dependence. They will also force government to choose policies that align with major power economic interests, and it actually creates political pressure that affect elections, leadership choices, and trade policies. For example, the political impact in Malaysia and ASEAN, there are agreements like AFTA or CEP that reshape political decision making. Countries like Singapore and Malaysia always gain more powers, acting almost like a mini core state. Meanwhile, poorer ASEAN countries, members like Indonesia, Cambodia, they would stay dependent, shaping their domestic policies around foreign investment needs. So political elites would benefit from increasing capital flow and reinforcing class division at home. So Marxism actually exposes that cooperation isn't neutral, it's political alignment based on who controls the capital. And the third impact is challenging political legitimacy. So Marxism says that political institutions keep power as long as they maintain global economic system that benefit elites. So this directly shapes national politics. For example, in Malaysia, during economic crisis, Malaysia followed IMF or World Bank style liberalization. Politically, this resulted in governments prioritizing investors' confidence over welfare spending, policies that benefit sweet T20 groups and capital owners more than B40 workers, inequality is becoming a political issue but rarely solved because the political system still depends on capital. So in ASEAN, however, Singapore would behave as a regional core economy, influencing ASEAN political decision to favor open markets and capital mobility. Laos, Cambodia, meanwhile, would remain politically dependent on richer states because their economy rely on aid, cheap labor exports, and foreign investment. While Japan and the US, they would shape infrastructure politics like funding ports, railways, digital system, which subtly somehow controls how Southeast Asian government plan development. For example, easy to say, like the tariff. Whatever happens with the ASEAN meeting the other day, the past few months, everything happens for a reason. So these political choices aren't just randoms. They actually maintain a system where powerful states shape the political direction of weaker states. So at the end of the day, Marxism reveals that a lot of mainstream theories try to hide, which is politics isn't just about government making decisions, it's also about capital influencing those decisions. So from Malaysia all over to ASEAN, from the US all over to China, there are only one pattern stands out, and that is states would protect politics, politics would protect power, and the vulnerable will stay vulnerable, the richer gets richer, because the system is always built that way. And only a miracle can change it. So that is all from me. I will pass on to the next presenter. Thank you.
The major social impact of Marxism is the rise of anti-colonial and worker movement. Marxists provided ideology foundation for colonized people to fight for interdependence and also dignity. Marxism inspired social movement that fought against colonialism, racism, and also class oppressions. Many leaders in Asia and also Africa adopted socialist or Marxist ideas during their independence struggles. It united people across borders through the idea of international solidarity, workers and the poor supporting each other globally. Example is Nelson Mandela in South Africa. African National Congress ANC aligned with the Communist Party, fight against apartheid frames as a class and also race struggles. So they gain equal rights and end of the racial segregations. The second one is global solidarity movement. Marxism helped create an international network of workers, students, and activists. It also shows that inequality exists not just between individuals, but between nations. Rich core countries exploit poor periphery countries. This perspective changed how people view international relations, emphasize social justice and fairness, not just powers or politics. For the example, the International Labour Movement, May Day or 1st May, commemorates the 1886 Chicago labor protest, where workers around the world demand rights simultaneously across national boundaries. The second one is anti-apartheid movements during 1960 to 1990s, international boycott of South African goods, sports events, and also cultural activity. The last one is promotion of equality and social justice. So Marxist critique of exploitations and influence modern human rights frameworks. Marxists push international intentions toward reducing poverty and also empowering workers and fight for social injustice. Many global organizations like UN were influenced by this idea when promoting a labor right, women's empowerment, and also fair wages. For the example, women's rights movement, UN, United Nations, Decades for a Woman's, were influenced by a socialist feminist idea connected women's rights and also to economic justice.
So in conclusion, Marxism is a theory which has been the basis for many famous ideologies, including socialist and communist doctrines. It exists due to many reasons, but mainly it exists to criticize the capitalist system. Karl Marx's idea is that capitalism is exploiting the poor working classes and maximizing the profit for the rich so they can be richer. This idea is accepted by many because of its relevance, but at the same time it is also criticized because of its many limitations. Nevertheless, it was a system that managed to change the world landscape in many ways, including economically, politically, and socially. Be it positive or negative, we cannot doubt that Marxism theory has its impact on the world. So as a closure, may what we have learned about this attempt to a fair and equal world is worthwhile and beneficial in its own way. Thank you. So in conclusion, Marxism is a theory which has been the basis for many famous ideologies, including socialist and communist.
The next question is, identify one ideological cause of the rise of Marxism and explain one opportunity it offers in studying international relations. So my answer is the widespread of dissatisfaction with political systems that primarily favored elites and ignored the needs of ordinary workers and peasants. At that time, liberal and monarchical governments promised freedom and representation, but in practice failed to address social and economic inequality. Marxism offered an alternative worldview emphasized equality, social justice, and class consciousness, advocating for the empowerment of the working class. In terms of opportunities in IR, Marxism provides a valuable lens to link domestic, social, and economic conditions to a country's actions and behavior in the global system. By focusing on class, exploitation, and structural inequality, Marxism helps explain how internal struggles and social pressures can shape international policies and alliances. For example, poor Russian workers before the 1917 revolution supported Marxist-inspired movements because their low wages, harsh working conditions, and lack of political representation motivated them to push for systematic change. This domestic unrest not only led to political reform within Russia, but also influenced the spread of socialist ideas and revolutionary movements in the other countries.
So the question is, why is Marxism still socially relevant today? Even though full Marxist states are rare, but Marxist idea influence a modern movement about workers' rights, minimum wages, inequality, anti-exploitations, and also social justice. So many countries adopt the soft Marxist policies through a welfare programs. Like Marxists remain socially relevant today because many of the problems it's focused on still exist today in the modern society. So even though most countries do not follow the full Marxist systems, but the ideas behind the Marxists continue to influence on the social movement, politics, and also public debate. Like for the example, the rising of social inequality. That many countries are experiencing a growing gap between the rich and the poor. So Marxism depicts the exploitations and the unfair wealth distributions, help people to understand why this inequality happened. So for the example, like the discussions is about the minimum wages, worker exploitation, unfair working conditions. That all reflects the Marxist idea.